put those that are qualified to be in the positions that they are supposed to be in, who rises الرويبضة. Those that are not qualified will have the audacity to start speaking and bring in the interpretation, and let me call it a false interpretation on Islam. Who put them forward? It was really us. Because when we don't put those that are qualified in their positions, and we don't put them behind the microphones, those that are not qualified are the ones that are going to come forward. Go ahead, my dear.
So when you say that, as people who are qualified, like our sheikhs and stuff, our imams, do they have a duty to speak up when they see people who are put in place?
So here's the thing. It's actually, it's exactly like it's a mutual thing. All right. So when you're speaking about scholars, it's not that they don't necessarily exist. Many times how they come forward is dependent on who is there to listen. So you've got the scholars, but do you actually have the audience to understand their quality? To understand what they really are? That's the question. The scholars are there. But when you see that the audience is so ignorant about recognizing their ilm, and appreciating what they have, and valuing the qualification, the scholar is not going to stand up right there and say, I'm a scholar, because the second that a scholar would say, I'm a scholar, etc., then they didn't recognize that they have a lot to learn. But here's one thing, is that it's important that even the scholar to recognize, when does he recognize that he's a scholar? Well, it's really when they see the society in front of them actually lacking that ilm. But how do those that lack the ilm recognize the scholar? Well, that's when they start getting at least the basics to learn their Islam, and then they start recognizing that alim has the resources. But it's not enough, because you need another alim to approve and validate that other alim's ilm. But to be honest, we do have female scholars within our community. We've got a number of them, but very few are actually exposed, especially Somali women. We have a great number within al-Quran, al-Qira'at, al-Tafseer that are actually doing an outstanding job. I'm not sure why those women are not considered, why they're not appreciated, why they're not given the value that they deserve. Is it them? I don't think it's them. I really think it's the community that did not value their qualification. It's the community. We have over 30 women here in the Twin Cities that actually have ijazat in 10 qira'at. And this is a witness of Walid al-Manisi. This is a witness of the different scholars, the different male scholars even. But then even if you were to search for the girls that want ijazat and etc., they'll always want a male scholar, thinking that if he's going to be a male scholar, then he should be more qualified. And the problem is really with us. Believe it or not, I've actually had a number of different phone calls that they would call me and say, hey, do you have the phone number for X or Y, Z, Sheikh? And I'm like, I mean, yeah, but can I help you in? And maybe I can help answer your question. And she would say, no, I need his number. I'm like, sure, I'll give you his number. But what is the question in regards to? And, oh, it's in regards to my period. I'm like, it's regards to your period. You want to call a male sheikh in regards to your period. And seriously. And I'm here telling you, I'll be happy to answer your question. No. What do you do in that situation? You're like, you know what? You just know that the person in front of you is ignorant about the ABCs of Islam. So you just, okay, you know what? That's the reality. All right. So what we're going to do today, we're going to continue with Surah Nisa. There's really a lot to say. But before we actually say that, right now, Israeli and American army is invading Gaza, turned off all the different communication systems, whether we're talking about electricity or whether we're talking about internet or whether we're talking about any communication systems off Gaza right now. And the Israeli and American forces right now are actually invading Gaza on ground. So let's make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would protect them, give them victory, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would shed his mercy on those that have actually lost their loved ones and give them the patience. Allahumma ameen. So that's what we could do with that dua. We cannot whatsoever forget that on the other side of the world, there are those that are living in nothing but fear, literally. بلغت القلوب الحناجر. بلغت القلوب الحناجر, where fear has definitely reached the very throats of each and every single family, where all they could hear is just airplanes over, airplanes, drones, missiles right around them. And of course, right beneath their feet, they're probably, hearing the sounds of their loved ones under the rebels. And just imagining all of that is just unbearable, to be honest. You want to say, but you can't help. You're seeing the whole world right before their eyes, actually watching all of this, and nothing stopping such terror. And of course, not even identifying anything as a way of defense for those that were seeking any type of security, any type of freedom, for a sanction that actually had 16 years preventing and giving, and basically not even giving the simple means of life for those that were living in Gaza. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them the victory, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them the security and give them the safety. Allahumma ameen. So to go into the ayat, يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا يحل لكم أن ترثوا النساء كرها. So we talked about, just to remember, we talked about Surah Nisa, the prelude with it, and where it was talking about laying out the foundation of family ties, and talked about the orphans and their rights, and then talked about polygamy, talked about the inheritance, the different laws of inheritance, and what relates to the laws of inheritance, whether in the distribution or whether we're talking about each and every single fraction, how much it would be to make a fair distribution. On the other hand, then we also continued and talked about the premise that took the other part of the ayat and talking about marriage relations. And of course, the premise was that women did not deserve inheritance because they were considered as being a probable holding the responsibility over bringing in the dishonor or disunity within the family. And then, of course, then it took us into talking about that area where when women do actually engage of any illicit act, we talked about that. And of course, we also talked about the second premise, which is considering that women were property, and therefore women, of course, with that premise that during the time of Jahiliyyah, they regarded that women were property. And of course, Islam wanted to totally ban that idea that women were property, and considered that women were not whatsoever a form of property, but in fact, they have the right to inherit. They have the right to decide their future spouses. They have the right to actually be independent, respected human beings, and not be treated like they were property passed along from one family to another, or even not given the right to inherit, or not given the right to have their own independent income, or even their own independent property and ownership. So these ayat were basically taking us into that segment. Now, it's really important, of course, in the Quran, when it talks about one subject, it can take you into connecting, kind of like a whole chain, and where it talks about one subject and then it connects it with another and then connects it with another. So of course, the Quran, a book of revelation and a book, of course, of as well as revelation in terms of aqidah, also a revelation in terms of legislature. So that's why it continues to connect the different ideas together to bring about the main premise that the ayah actually started out with, which is that rights of women, that they are to be protected, and that يا أيها الناس or يا أيها الناس اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. And of course, the whole premise was in order to actually take in consideration the women and rahim, and to give that as that it is part of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hold the community accountable for in dealing with rahim. So then, speaking about, of course, marriage, and the previous ayah was talking about how women were not to be inherited, but they have the right to inherit, but they are not a property to be inherited to others, in order to end and bring a total ending to a common culture during the time of Jahiliyyah. And we also talked about how it was a common practice where they would pressure the women by banning her, or at least forbidding her from getting married, in order to maintain the property within the area that they wanted to designate to, and rather than having that become a future shared property with other people. So they would use a form of al-adl, which is preventing them. Wait, this is the iqama before the adhan. Okay. Okay, so I guess we're the only ones that didn't hear the adhan, huh? Okay. All right, so we'll pray inshallah and come back, because we really have a lot to cover. And trust me, it's going to be really interesting, inshallah. This is extremely important.
الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. ويوم يعض الظالم على يديه يقول يا ليتني اتخذت مع الرسول سبيلا يا ويلتى ليتني لم أتخذ فلانا خليلا لقد أضلني عن الذكر بعد إذ جاءني وكان الشيطان للإنسان خذولا وقال الرسول يا رب إن قومي اتخذوا هذا القرآن مهجورا وكذلك جعلنا لكل نبي عدوا من المجرمين وكفى بربك هاديا ونصيرا. الله الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. آمين. ويل لكل همزة لمزة الذي جمع ماله وعدده يحسب أن ماله أخلده كلا لينبذن في الحطمة وما أدراك ما الحطمة نار الله الموقدة التي تطلع على الأفئدة إنها عليهم مؤصدة في عمد ممددة. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Didn't see anything, did you? Okay, just making sure. Go sit in. All right, to continue, inshallah. So since it was talking about, like we said, marriage in certain rulings. Now, here's one thing. Because of this wording right here, so the ayah was saying, do not prevent women from basically getting married and moving on. Of course, that is after the death of their husbands or the divorce, all right? And of course, and the reason why they were doing that is because they wanted to leave those women within, let's call it, within their authority, in order to control the wealth that they actually own. So, but then it says, إِلَّا يَأْتِينَ بِفَاحِشَةٍ مُبَيِّنَةٍ, unless they had actually brought in or committed a major fahisha, a major illicit behavior. And we talked about that some might use this in a way to abuse women and give themselves the justification to abuse the women, and somehow in pressure the women to give up on their financial rights to go for khula. And of course, because of that wording right here, and some might actually abuse it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, emphasizing عاشروهن بالمعروف, that the way that you should treat women is supposed to be on good terms, supposed to be in good principles. And therefore, then the other ayah continues, since we're talking about getting married and the women having the right to remarry and so forth, that's why it continues within that idea. وَإِنْ أَرَدْتُمُ اسْتِبْدَالَ زَوْجٍ مَكَانَ زَوْجٍ. Now here, I know you could see that dal gray and the ta actually being black. So right here, أردت مستبدالة, so that dal right there actually becomes silent. So this is a rule of tajweed in where when the dal and the ta together are basically following one another, one letter has a sukoon and the other letter it has a haraka, that in that situation, this becomes a silent letter. And then you would read it as aradtum, not aradatum, aradtum. So right there, this becomes silent. All right, now going into the topic. So now, aradtum mustibdala zawjin makana zawj. In situations, we're going to read the wording. Let me call it the surface translation, and then we'll go deeper inside. وإن أردتم استبدال زوج, and if you seek to replace, in other words, replace one spouse with another spouse, and you had given any of these women قنطارة, treasures, then do not take anything from it. Would you take it? And if you were to take it, أتأخذونه بهتانا وإثما مبينا, do you take it in blasphemy and a major transgression, or an obvious transgression? Now, here's one thing. Although this translation is, I would say, too crude, there's actually a lot more to it. So yes, here it's talking about when the situation that a woman wants to move on with her second marriage or another marriage. And of course, she is seeking, because right there it said, فَلَا تَعْضُلُوهُنَّ. Here was telling them, well, don't pressure them to somehow get them to give up on their financial rights. So this ayah comes in to explain, well, if she is going to marry someone else, and even if you were to give her qintara, what is il-qintar? Il-qintar is treasures. Now, if you were to give them treasures, فَلَا تَأْخُذُوا مِنْهُ شَيْئًا, then you cannot actually take from the treasures / mahr anything from it. If you were to actually take that, that would really be buhtan. What is al-buhtan? Al-buhtan is blasphemy or a major lie, but a major lie because it was a way to create a narrative to oppress somebody by taking away their rights and creating a justification that it is actually permissible, when in the reality of it, it is not. It is blatant blasphemy. It is a blatant lie that you had given yourself a narrative that it is permissible for you to take her mahr under the pretense that, well, she wasn't actually acting well. She was somehow not deserving this wealth because of the many different dispute reasons that could be the main cause to why a marriage would be ending. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is then warning the men in case of dispute, whether we're talking about a divorce or whether we're talking about a widow, she would have the right. She would have the right to take all her mahr, and no one has the right to take anything from it. Because with that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is calling it buhtan, blatant lying, and ithm mubin. Ithm is transgression. It's a form of transgression. Mubin, it's an obvious transgression that you had taken that woman's wealth without her consent when it was really belonging to her. Now, a number of different things actually fall in this ayah. Istibdal zawj wa in aradtum. The wording, the discourses is really directed at the wali. The discourse is not directed, whether it's the wali or it's the husband, it's not directed at women. And this is important to keep in mind because yes, Islam definitely gives the right for women to determine whether she wants to get married or not. But at the same time, it was always giving the direction and always the discourse is directed at the awliya to support women's rights, to support and make sure that even the women understand that when it comes to marriage or certain responsibilities, do take your walis your wali's opinion. Do get also that decision making involving your own wali to make sure that they are there when you actually need them. At the end of the day, women end up being the most victims when things go wrong because they are the most vulnerable financially and physically. And then they end up getting abused by other men. So definitely, so you will not get abused, get your father, get your brothers involved to help you make the right decisions. One thing I would like to say is that a lot of times girls right now, because of the social commercialization, let me say it that way, of college degrees, it's very common that I would get girls telling me, well, my father's not educated, thinking that because he doesn't have a college degree or university degree, that he's not qualified to actually say or even consider his decision or opinion on life matters. He's not educated. And I would like to say that college degrees are often over commercialized to somehow make it be as if it was a sign or what proves somebody's understanding or what proves somebody's value. This is not accurate. In Islam, your college degree does not reflect your value. I'm sorry. It doesn't. When we're speaking about life matters, experience in life is totally different than experience in whatever you learned in school. Learning how to write an essay, your language capabilities, or whether it's your math or whatever it is that you had learned in school, does not mean that you necessarily have the experience in making decisions in life. Those are two different things. Two different things. Your father, your brothers, they will be the ones that Islam is asking them to be in your support. And al-ghunmu bil-ghurm, just as we're asking them to be at your support when something wrong happens, it's definitely fair to include them in the decision making to make sure that this is the right choice for you. Now, وَآتَيْتُمْ إِحْدَاهُنَّ قِنْطَارًا, and if you were to give the women even a treasure. Now, scholars actually had debated this one because the word qintar is basically to mean treasures. So scholars debated on whether there is at all a limit to how much, or in other words, the maximum number of mahar, and is there a minimum number of mahar? Now, the minimum mahar is that one, it would be of something of value. Two, that the minimum of mahar would be something that is halal to keep, to own. That's the minimum of value and something to own. Now, and that it would be something that can be given to the person, whether we're talking about an actual property or an actual item, or whether we're speaking about some form of what is called, not mu'awada, but we're talking about some form of work that you would do for the person, service. So let's say the husband said, well, I will build her a house, or I will build her something. So this basically acts as giving the service in order to give it as mahar. So the mahar can be a service on the other hand. Now, 4, scholars debated whether something that cannot be owned, whether it can be mahar or not. So what are we looking at? Quran. You memorize the Quran, that's her mahr. Scholars debated on whether that can act as mahr or not. Why did they debate that? Number one is because when the Sahabi, he said he cannot afford anything, and the Prophet ﷺ said, زَوَّجْتُكَهَا بِمَا مَعَكَ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ, that I had gotten her married to you with whatever you had memorized from the Quran. Majority of the scholars regarded that that does not act as mahr, and that was exclusive for that Sahabi. That was exclusive for that Sahabi because the Prophet ﷺ approved it for him, but that it cannot necessarily be generalized for other people if somebody had memorized the Quran to actually say, well, okay, there you go, that's your mahr. Because they considered that the mahr should be something that can be transitioned to be under her property. And that if you were to memorize the Quran, that's good for you. That's not going to be transitional for her to keep in any way as a property to benefit for herself, to probably move on. In other words, something as giving her some form of, let me say, provision to help her move on after this divorce, if it were to happen, or a death, if it were to happen. So the mahr was really supposed to be some form of value to help the woman move on in her life if something were to happen. It is basically a financial support. This financial support, if he memorized the Quran, well, good for you. You can be an imam at the masjid and probably make $3,200. But then how am I going to be making anything if something were to happen? You're the one that's making the income, not me. All right, that's number one. Number two, when we're speaking about memorizing Quran, or the person telling you, well, he memorized the Quran, etc., do I recommend that at the time being? I absolutely do not recommend it. Why not? I think that many times the religious girls are too utopian in the way they would review religious men. Sorry about that, ladies. Too utopian. They would assume that a religious man somehow is living in some form of a Sahabi level. A religious man, and this happens a lot because of the separation between men and women. So, alhamdulillah, it doesn't mean that we need to change the separation between men and women, but it happens a lot that women would have a very utopian image of what a religious man does and think that he is living in a different category, and would assume that, believe it or not, I've had women call me. This is real, ladies. This is real. Are you ready to hear this? I one time had a woman actually call me and said she wanted to seek divorce. And I said, why? She said, because I discovered that the reason why he married me is totally different than the reason why I married him. I said, why did you marry him? I said, for spiritual reasons. Why did he marry you? For sexual reasons. Are you serious? Are you serious? You think the man was looking for a woman to do salah with? Are you serious? Are you serious? You think he just didn't have enough people to do salat al-jama'ah with? Are you serious? You think he was just looking for someone to basically line up in salat al-jama'ah? Of course he married you for that. Of course he married you for that. He was looking to complete his deen. So it's really sad. This is another thing in where too utopian in their vision of what a religious man is supposed to be. And what they end up really doing is that many times, because of the wrong image, they would have the wrong expectation. And then they end up feeling incompatible. Well, you had the wrong image, you had the wrong expectation, and you ended up with the wrong conclusion. It's that simple. You ended up with the wrong conclusion. You end up with the wrong conclusion. You end up making the wrong mistakes. You end up making very bad mistakes. You ended up with the wrong thing. Now, having that being said, when we actually look at the part about mahr, do I recommend Quran being the mahr? The answer is no. Why? Because even if this person has a beard, even if he's the imam of the masjid, he's a human being at the end of the day. If things go wrong, we need an actual thing to give you the support. All right? We need an actual thing to give you the support. I want you to be, let me call it pragmatic in a certain way.
Is there a limit?
Realistic. Is there a limit to maximum? There isn't a limit to maximum, but there's a limit to the minimum. All right? A limit to the minimum. So it has to be mal mutaqawwam. It has to be something that we can value. We can estimate a value. It has to be halal. It has to be something that we can consider within the community as it is of value. So let's say he gave you something of value. So can he tell me that I'm going to give you this candy or whatever it is as your mahr? Absolutely not. Because this is not considered of value within our society. Right? It's not considered of something of value. Even a child might actually throw it. We would look at something of value, of real value. Got it? Now, the maximum, on the other hand, Umar ibn al-Khattab attempted to put a limit to the maximum because many women, I guess, were abusing that qantar part, and he thought, well, let me put a limit to the maximum. And when he attempted to do that, a woman stood up in the masjid and actually said, well, how would you put, in the masjid, mind you, in the masjid, and said, how would you put a limit to it when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala literally said, that it's actually permitting that we would take a whole qantar. Well, obviously, we can't necessarily, we won't assume, unless these people were somehow just tremendously rich, it would be a different situation. But we won't imagine somebody actually giving mahr of treasures and treasures. But this is in Lugha Arabiya a form of exaggeration. Just like when we talk about the hadith, when the Prophet ﷺ actually says, "Man bana lillahi masjidan walau kamafhasi qatat." And the Prophet ﷺ actually said in the hadith, whoever would build a masjid, even if that was kamafhasi qatat, even if that was as small as a bird's nest or a pigeon's nest. Well, we're not going to imagine whatsoever that somebody's going to be building a masjid as small as a bird's nest. But this is a form of exaggeration to say, even if it was that small, it's not to be understood literally. And same thing here, this is not to be understood literally, that if a person were to actually get, let me see it. Okay, here we go. This is not to be understood literally, that if any of the women were to actually get mahr as qintar, as treasures. This is not to be understood, like I said, literally. Now, the woman that stood in the masjid, a very common story that was mentioned, that when she said that publicly and attempted to stop Umar ibn al-Khattab just responded, all the people are afqahu minka ya Umar. All the people are more they have more knowledge and more fiqh and deep understanding in Islam than you, Umar. Or there is another narration that Umar ibn Khattab made the mistake and the woman asabat imra'a, and the woman was right. At the end of the day is that regardless of how the story actually happened, we basically would look that the Prophet ﷺ did not put a limit. Now, here's one thing. There is a story that some scholars did use and did use as an evidence that puts a limit to al-mahr. And that story was a man came, it was narrated by, I believe it was, I don't know who the narrator was, but anyhow. So this Sahabi basically gets married to a woman, and the Prophet ﷺ said, كأنكم تقطعون الذهب والفضة من عرض الحرة أو جبل. So as if you were cutting off or exacerbating or cutting off or cutting or dividing or taking away the gold and the silver, as if, and it's like you're taking it easily from the mountains, and in other words, the rocks of the mountains around Medina. It's like you can't afford that. Now, different interpretations for this hadith. The first interpretation said, well, we would look at the status and that there would be a limit to the most mahr, because this hadith is basically recommending that people would not exaggerate in the high number of mahr. Because if they were to exaggerate, that would be outside of the capacity of most men and might actually bring in some fitna within the society. The second opinion, and of course, this is the evidence that they had actually based it on. The second opinion rejected that entirely and said there is no limit to the maximum. And their response to this hadith that I have just mentioned, they said, well, this is not saying that you cannot have a qintar or even a maximum to a mahr. There is no maximum. And that this was the Prophet ﷺ's opinion and recommendation to the man. It's like, well, you can't even afford such high mahr. Why would you go and accept a high mahr that you cannot afford? That was basically the Prophet ﷺ recommending to that poor man not to accept such a high mahr and end up probably needing government assistance or even living on donations because he had put upon himself more than what he can handle. So that's another interpretation, but majority actually regarded that there is no maximum and that the ayah is actually left as what it literally says, even if they were to put upon themselves a very high mahr. The highest mahr that I have heard of coming to my office is a Palestinian woman that had on her marriage contract, her mahr was $1 million. Guess what happened? What was that? Is that Randa? Is that you? Come on, admit it. No. All right, $1 million. Guess what happened? The marriage didn't actually work out. The marriage didn't work out. Did the guy actually pay $1 million? No. Why did he accept in the beginning? Exactly. Why did he accept in the beginning? He didn't pay the $1 million. You know what she did? She just hated the guy and hated his guts that she let go of the $1 million. She's like, you know what? I don't want the $1 million because he was like, I would never be capable of paying you the $1 million. Guess stay in the marriage. And I'll get married to a second wife because I'll never be able to pay you $1 million. So she ended up, you know what? Don't need the $1 million. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, but
so if he were to divorce, he would have to pay the $1 million. Got it? But he can't afford to pay the $1 million. So he was like, well, I'll stay in the marriage, I guess, because I can't afford.
Why is he looking for a second wife?
He wants a second wife.
Wait, they actually got married?
Well, he can afford to get married to a second wife, but when you're talking about $1 million to pay in mahar,
To pay the
it would be a
$1
lot cheaper for him to get married to a second wife with probably a cost of probably $10,000 than $1 million.
So he agreed to the marriage, not knowing that he won't be able to pay. It's on him.
So he didn't expect that the marriage would not work out.
He has the money to pay her mahar. So he just
So,
accepted.
so in the Palestinian culture, there is a down payment mahar and there's a delayed mahar. Okay, they would split it. Okay, so the delayed mahar would be basically later on, all right, later on, when he can afford it, but he was never capable of affording it. So she basically decided, you know, I don't want this marriage. And she decided to go for khulu' and let go of her $1 million because to her, her life was apparently more important than the $1 million, which would make sense. At the end of the day, is that be realistic. What I'm saying is be realistic. Even if you were to put amount of $1 million and you know that the guy is barely making $4,000 a month, sorry, where's he going to get the $1 million from? Be realistic in the amount of mahar that you're asking for. That's what we're saying. All right, because if the marriage were not to work out, you're the one that's going to actually pay the price. Go ahead, my dear.
Is negotiating the mahar after you get married a thing? Like if she
Negotiating the
wants-
mahar comes before, my dear.
No, I know. So like, let's say she sets a set amount for mahar, and they agree on it, and then after nikah, for some reason, let's say like the example you're just telling us right now, she decided to kind of bring it down to, I don't know, a couple thousand instead of like $1 million. Is that a thing? Or
That's permissible. That is definitely a thing. That's definitely a thing because that's actually what the ayat we were doing before. Remember when we were talking about in the ayat when it was talking about, let's go back to it so you could actually see it. Let's zoom out so we could actually see it. And then when the ayah right there was telling you that, hold on, where to go? Let's see. Remember when we got to, here we go. When we got to وَأَتُوا النِّسَاءَ صَدُقَاتِهِنَّ نِحْلَةً. Remember when we talked about this ayah, فَإِن طِبْنَ لَكُمْ عَنْ شَيْءٍ مِّنْهُ نَفْسًا فَكُلُوهُ هَنِيئًا مَرِيئًا. That if, give the women their rights for mahar, all right, as nihla, as a religious duty. Yet if they willingly would give up on it, that is the mahar, then in that situation you can take it. They willingly, طِبْنَ, it is by complete will. But can they willingly give you all of it or part of it? They can willingly give you part of it or willingly give you all of it. All right, at the end of the day, طِبْنَ لَكُمْ عَنْ شَيْءٍ مِّنْهُ. So we got right there, minhu, part of it, can be part of it. She can say, you know, khalas, it's okay, I'll give up on 20% of it or 30% of it, give me this much. That's absolutely her right. She could do that. But in this situation, she ended up, you know what? I don't want any of this. Don't want any of this. All right, let's continue. Where was I? With this right here. فَلَا تَأْخُذُوا مِنْهُ شَيْئًا. Now, here's one interesting thing. There is a scholar that actually, his name is al-Muzani. He said that this ayah proves that khulu' should not be in compensation to anything. You know what that means? Al-khulu'. What is al-khulu'? Al-khulu' is when the woman and the man would agree on a resolution. Right? Resolution, separation. Now, one thing, there is no limit to how many times she can come back from the khulu' and change her mind. You know what that means? Let's say the man and the wife, they agreed on a khulu'. Huh? They agreed on a khulu' October 27. Agreed on the khulu'. Today, the second day, she's basically moving on, renting her own apartment. Bye-bye. She gave up on her mahar. That's what khulu' means. Gave up on my mahar. They both agreed, all right, you know what? I don't need you. Basically, got a separation. Second day, she was right there, going in her own apartment, wanted to move on. Let's say November 27, she's like, guess what? How about we get back together? Oh, it happens a lot. You'll be surprised. It happens a lot. You'll be surprised. All right. Can she do that? Yes. If he accepts.
Okay, so
And if, well, she's accepting, she's offering. What if he says, he calls her up, he said, listen, I really love you and I want you to be back. Can that happen?
No.
She would have to give consent if she wants to. Or if she doesn't want to, without her consent, he can't force her. But if it was a divorce, in a first divorce and a second divorce, during the iddah, he can bring her back without her consent. I know, what? Let me explain it to you. Without her consent? Yes, I know. Wait, hold on, let me explain it to you. Look at the faces right there. Let me explain it to you. Hold on. Let me explain it to you. Hold on, I know the faces were like, what just happened? All right, we're gonna do it this way. Don't worry, I'll explain it to you. So you got right there, we've got the whiteboard. Oh, yeah, don't worry, I'll explain it to you. Where's the pen? Where's the pen? There's supposed to be a whiteboard. Here we go. All right, so when we're looking at divorce, okay, you got the first divorce, you got the second divorce, and if, let's now use a red color, okay?
When you say first and second, are you talking about when he's saying?
He's saying, he's the one, he's like talaq. You are talaq. So in that situation, this is a first divorce. During the first divorce, you would have a waiting period. Waiting period, if she gets a cycle for 3 cycles, gets 3 cycles, if she's pregnant until she gets the baby, okay? If she doesn't get a period after menopause, all right, then it's 3 months, right? Now, since he initiated the divorce, within the waiting period, if he brings her back, this is not dependent on her consent. He initiated the divorce. Basically, well, I'm going to go back on this. What if she said, no, I'm still angry, don't want to come back? He's the one that initiated the divorce. Anyways, he is going back and voiding what he had initiated. So, in other words, it's not dependent on your consent. It's dependent on what he had initiated. He's going back on what he initiated. So during the waiting period, it's not dependent on her consent. Even if she refuses, she would still be considered married.
Is this after you go through the whole all the process and officially get divorced?
No. This is the first divorce, whether there's a qadi or not. All right? This is a divorce, not fasakh. Al-fasakh is what the qadi will pursue. The man cannot change the qadi's words. The qadi gives al-fasakh. The man, the husband, cannot change the qadi's order. No, the qadi's order, we're talking about a Muslim lawyer, a Muslim qadi. All right? We're not talking about the American qadi or Western qadi. Got it? I'll explain it to you. So if a first divorce happens, during the waiting period, he returns her, even if she doesn't give consent. This marriage is still valid. Yet, if the waiting period passes and he wanted to bring her back, we will say, do you consent? If she says no, nope, you can't force her to come back. Got it? What if she said, all right, we're going to say, wait, not too fast. We need a new marriage contract, new consent, and new mahar. We're going to charge you. And new mahar. We're going to charge you right there. No, this is whether this is a first divorce or whether this is a second divorce and after the waiting period had ended. A divorce can be texting your taliq, can be saying literally you are taliq and saying, or giving something that basically which is basically meaning that the person is taliq. So for example, haram alay, you're haram on me or something like that. Then in that situation, be like, okay, what did you mean by that? I really meant that you would be taliq. It's like, okay, we're going to take that as you initiated a divorce. All right. So whether that was in the first divorce or the second divorce, then in that situation, we would basically say during the waiting period, it's not dependent on her consent. After the waiting period, then we're going to say, guess what? You're going to have to respect that woman. She has been hurt enough from you. You're going to have to pay more mahar, make a new marriage contract, and we're going to basically ask you to give her the respect that she deserves. Fair enough? We don't start all over. No, the previous divorces are still considered, still counting. All right?
Even after the marriage contract,
Absolutely. The previous count of divorces are still valid. All right. Now let's continue.
I have a question.
Yep.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
So the divorces are counted before the end of the iddah or after? So let's say he said your divorce
is counted from the time he initiated an actual divorce.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
So whether he liked the iddah, didn't like the iddah, she went through the iddah, that's not here what we're talking about. You initiated the divorce, that's when it's going to be counted. You set it at what, 12:15 p.m. That's what we're going to count. And it's not necessarily based on what the qadi had signed. What the qadi signed and etc. does not change. That the qadi's signature and the report is just putting an official revision what the qadi has reviewed. That's it. But it doesn't change the fact we don't necessarily need to have the qadi finalize, and the qadi's report is not what makes a valid talaq. A valid talaq would be a talaq that the husband initiated. Got it?
Yes, thank you.
Khulu' is different because khulu', they both mutually agreed to end the marriage on a compensation that she would give. She's like, I know you paid mahar, and you know what? Here's the mahar. Take it. I don't want it. And he accepted.
Is the mahar the minimum she should give?
She would basically give up on the mahar, or she would give up on the mahar and also the nafaqah. After the divorce, there would be a nafaqat al-iddah, the nafaqah during iddah. In other words, during these three cycles, what happens? Well, she still stays at home.
She has to stay at home?
Absolutely. She stays at home.
If she goes to her parents?
I'll get it to. I'll get to you. The only time that she would leave her home is one, if she's in danger, or if she had committed something like cheating, etc. That's a different story. But if she's in danger, well, he's so violent and she needed to leave that house. She felt that she was in danger. She can actually leave the marriage. But she should be doing the iddah, even the iddah of divorce, at home. And while she's doing that iddah, who's going to be providing for her? It's basically the husband. During the iddah, he's providing for her exactly the way he was providing for her before, whether it's rent, food, health insurance, all the different things, basically during that time. So can she just move on and it is not even take his permission to leave the house and etc.? No, he is still considered Islamically still your husband. You should not leave the house unless there was a reason to leave the house. And to take his permission is still valid. Is still valid to take this permission to go out. Are you guys with me here? No? Okay.
Sheikha?
Yep.
What if she takes his permission to go to her parents, and then when she goes to her parents, she's like, I'm not coming back?
So one thing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا يَخْرُجْنَا إِلَّا أَن يَأْتِينَ بِفَاحِشَةٍ مُبَيِّنَةٍ. They should not leave the house unless there was an illicit behavior that was done from the woman. So unless she was found cheating, she brought someone to the house, etc., that's a different story. So وَلَا يَخْرُجْنَ. Therefore, the women doing the iddah within the marriage and within the household is a form of ibadah. Keep that in mind. Doing the iddah is a form of ibadah. To be within the household and stay within the household, within this marriage, is a form of ibadah, because there's still a marriage bond that has not ended. Therefore, she should not leave the household unless she takes his permission. What if he had given her the permission, go and do the iddah at your parents' house? Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says they should not leave. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had even mentioned, وَلَا لَا تُخْرِجُوهُنَّ مِن بُيُوتِهِنْ. Don't get them out of their homes. And consider that this home belongs to her. وَلَا يَخْرُجْنَ. And they should not go out. Because the whole idea of iddah is to bring about a possibility and a probability to bring the marriage back. In Arabic, we say بعيد عن القلب, بعيد عن العين, بعيد عن العين, بعيد عن القلب. If you are going to be gone, you're going to become forgotten. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is really punishing both. How many people are married here? Okay. For the married women, you know very well that when the husband and you are angry at each other, whether you're giving him a cold shoulder, where he's giving you a cold shoulder, how many times did we get angry at each other? And later on, as if nothing happened. Why? Whether because he needed you or you needed him. Right? Right? And you end up, and many times it happens, she'll fake like she's trying to pass by when she's in reality trying to basically bring some kind of a temptation. This is real. And Islam is actually asking you to do that. And he's probably trying to fake and that he's around in order to somehow not want to dishonor himself. And it's like, I'm here, I'm making his own coffee, when in reality, it's not the coffee that he needs, it's really her. Right? We know that. It's really her. She'll pretend to make coffee and trying to somehow, provoke her. I'm right next to you. Come on. Right? Exactly. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling the women, don't leave. Don't leave, because the whole idea, the whole logic behind why your iddah is at home is really to bring in a possibility, whether it's a temptation from you or him, but to bring in the hearts together. When you're gone, the possibility is going to be reduced.
Even families have to.
Absolutely. The family, and here's another thing, like she said, when you get into outside of your space, the other people are going to start getting involved. Your family is going to get involved. Do not get your family involved until things come to a dead end. What happens between you and your husband, don't involve other people. Because guess what? Once you tell your family about your husband or him telling them about you, you might get along, but the family won't forget. They will see you as the enemy, and he will see, and they will see him as an enemy, but you know that no one's infallible. He's got his shortcomings. So why do I have to expose the shortcomings? And they would actually always say that their daughter, no one's ever going to be compatible to her. She's so precious to us. And they're never going to see you as compatible. They're always going to think we could have actually got somebody prettier than her. She's just stingy. She's just with an attitude. But the guy loved her. But they'll never see you as compatible anyways. So the guy shouldn't be exposing his wife's shortcomings, and she shouldn't be exposing her husband's shortcomings to either of those parents. Go ahead, my dear.
On that, when he does the first and the second talaq, who should know about it?
So both should know about it. Of course, both should know about it.
Yeah.
Number two is that you can document it to the Islamic Center, for example, or let maybe your brother know about it, or people that you trust. Don't let this be public property. This is not public property. Keep it between you and him. Because guess what? The second you become public property, that same second, your information and your marriage becomes people's business, and they will start dictating your life. Don't become people's properties, because the second they constantly are talking about you, they're not talking about what is best for you. Later on, once a divorce happens, guess what happens? All those that were spewing and dictating what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be doing, once a divorce, an actual divorce happens, they have nothing to talk about. They'll leave you. They'll have nothing to talk about. They'll leave you, and you'll actually be facing your own fate. Same thing for the guy. All those people that were recommending this guy to hate this woman, recommending that he should divorce her, etc. Once he's divorced, they're basically enjoying their marriages. And what happens to that man? He's left to figure out his fate. The children, he's the one that's going to end up trying to figure out how to take care of them, etc. No one's going to be there to say, "Oh, I'll take your children and basically take them to the park or take care of them." No, you're going to be doing it. So when you make those decisions, make sure you understand how to honor yourself and honor your marriage and honor your relationship. And by the way, this common thing that people are always talking about, compatibility, no one's compatible with the other one. It's all about compromising. This type of rhetoric, unfortunately, a lot of the so-called marriage counseling and all of that, a lot of it, unfortunately, is building it off a certain psychological premise. And what we're seeing is more marriages actually falling apart than actually the marriage working. There's no such thing as complete compatibility. We don't have anyone that we're 100% compatible with, not even your own brothers and sisters. Each and every single one of you has their own personality, has their own vision. It's that at the end of the day, it's that we compromise, we adjust, we figure things out. He's the person that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had assigned as the one to be the qawwam, the decision maker at home. Let's just respect that. All right, let's continue. So, yeah, go ahead. Man, she scared me. Go ahead. Fair enough. For khulu', there is no limit. In divorce, the limit is 3 divorces. For khulu', there's no limit to how many khulu's. So let's say November 27, they basically come back together. Okay, come back together. And they basically would come back. And let's say they were like December 27. Oh, I thought you had changed. They did another khulu', right? Thought you had changed. They don't know. January 27, they come back together. There is no limit. Now, one thing, is there a iddah? Is there a iddah? Scholars have differences of opinions on whether there is a iddah that is of 1 cycle compared to 3, but they all agreed that if a woman is pregnant, the Prophet ﷺ said, ملعون من سقى ماءه زرع غيره. ملعون من سقى ماءه زرع غيره. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had cursed the man that irrigates somebody else's water. And this is basically in order to speak about a metaphor that you had planted this seed. If a woman is pregnant, somebody else to water your seed is somebody cursed. So the woman that is pregnant, her iddah would continue until she would get the baby. Got it? Now, the khulu', in terms of a woman that gets cycles, is it 1 cycle or is it 3 cycles? The preponderant is that it is 3 cycles. Can he bring her back during the iddah, not without her consent? You see the difference? That during the iddah for a divorce, he can bring her without her consent. For khulu', you agreed. That's it. Go ahead.
So if they both agree while she's pregnant, and they both stay separate, like different homes.
Yeah.
They can.
Khalas. Yes. If they agreed, they did October 27. Yeah, you know what? Here's your mahar. I got your mahar. Here's the check. It's a valid check. It's not going to be a return check. $27,000. Thank you very much. And guess what? Even the nafaqah, don't want you paying that either. Here's $27,000. And he'll be like, okay, takes a picture of it and does a mobile, right there, mobile deposit. He gets a deposit. It's valid. Thank you very much. See you later.
So after the 9 months, what happens?
9 months, if she's pregnant?
Yeah, if she's pregnant.
If she's pregnant, she moves on. Khalas. She gets the baby and
But if she gives
basically-
back the mahar and he decides to how can I say that?
to basically get back.
Yeah, he decides to get back. If
So-
it's khula and she gives the mahar, should he give the mahar again?
Fair enough. So if he gives the mahar back, khalas, she would be the one to accept taking it back or not. You can't play games like that. All right? It's a form. It's a form of hadiyah. She gave you back the hadiyah. But let's see, what is the basis of all of this? A hadith, Asma bint Shammas. What's her name? Asma bint Shammas. She came to the Prophet ﷺ. Listen to this, ladies. And she was complaining about a Sahabi. His name is Thabit ibn Qais. What's his name? Thabit ibn Qais. She came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, لا عيب علي. لا في خلق ولا في دين. There's no complaint. Not in his morality and not in his piety. The highest. Perfect. So what's wrong with you? إلا أني أكره الكفر في الإسلام. I'm afraid, after recognizing the duties that a woman has upon her husband, I'm afraid I can't be dutiful to my husband, and I would be close to a kafira by staying in this marriage. Don't want him. So he said, the Prophet ﷺ said, أتردين عليه حديقته? Would you give him back the garden that he had given you as a mahar, that is? And she said, yes. That was the basis for khula. That's the basis for khula. All right. Now, mind you, Thabit ibn Qais. You know who Thabit ibn Qais is? What does the name Thabit mean? Firm, determined. Thabit, he was a Sahabi that was known for his loud voice. When the ayah was revealed in Surah al-Hujurat, لا ترفعوا أصواتكم فوق صوت النبي ولا تجهروا له بالقول كجهر بعضكم لبعض أن تحبط أعمالكم وأنتم لا تشعرون. Don't raise your voices before the Prophet ﷺ, for your good deeds might actually all be disregarded without you knowing. Thabit thought that that was referring to him. So he stayed home. The Prophet ﷺ would send the Sahaba to get Thabit. Thabit was afraid and he would just cry in his home. And the Prophet ﷺ would send the Sahaba to actually go get him. And he said, are there more ayat revealed to tell me about the fate in hellfire? So the Prophet ﷺ sent to him and said, tell him, Thabit thabitun fil jannah. Thabit is firm as his name in Jannah. This is Thabit thabitun fil jannah, ya salam. Go ahead, my dear.
Yeah, so my question is, you know, the khula, so it's when the guy gives you the meher, right? In some cultures, there's people that don't give out the meher. So what should
Fair enough. Al-Mahr is two types. There is the type what is called the Mahr Musamma, and there's the type in where it is Mahr al-Mithal. What is al-Mahr al-Musamma? Al-Mahr al-Musamma in where the Mahr was assigned in terms of the amount. If the amount was assigned, we got it easy. If the amount was not assigned, we would go for the equivalent mahr, the average mahr within that community. We would say, well, how much did your sister get in mahr? I don't have a sister. How about your cousin? How about your aunt? How about your relatives? What is the average mahr within your community? Then we would look at that and we would say, here's your average mahr. This is your mahr. There's no such thing as a woman getting married without mahr. That's why the ayah says, وَآتُوا النِّسَاءَ صَدُقَاتِهِنَّ نِحْلَةً. This is a religious assignment. Allahu Akbar.
Allahu Akbar.
I guess we can't hear it, but let me answer this question. Do you cover up when you do the iddah at home? No, my dear, you don't cover up when you're doing the iddah at home. In contrast, dress up. In contrast, dress up. Unless you're doing the third divorce. The third divorce, he either leaves or you leave. Because now he's considered as an ajnabi. He's considered as not your husband anymore. He leaves or you leave. You cannot be at home together. Got it? You can't be at home together. All right. So this is for the third. This is for the third divorce that you would leave. But during the iddah, no, they can't. What if he wanted to be intimate with her? He would basically have to announce, whether to her brother, to her family, etc., and bring back my wife, or bring you back, etc. All right? Now, for khulu', it's a different story. Khulu' happens when they mutually agree. Not that, well, I offered it to him. Khalas, that's it. No. Should be upon his consent as well. what if he's not consenting? Then in that situation, your option is to raise the situation to the qadi if you really want a resolution and an ending to the marriage, to basically prove that there was harm or there is harm in the marriage. What if there isn't real harm and it's not necessarily harm, but I don't want the guy? Then in that situation, the qadi can consider making that fasakh and can actually bring about the divorce and basically end the marriage. Where was I? Now let's go on with the ayah. فَلَا تَأْخُذُوا مِنْهُ شَيْئًا. In other words, they cannot take. And from that, so the response to the scholars that said that this ayah is nasikha, is abrogating the ayah that's in Surah al-Baqarah that permits doing khulu, is basically not the preponderant opinion. What is naskh? We talked about that. What's the opposite of naskh? Al-ihkam. There are ayat that are muhkama and ayat that are nasikha or mansukha, right? You guys with me here? Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, when you say that an ayah is mansukha or nasikha, what is nasikha? Abrogation basically means that the ruling either was changed for a later ayah that was revealed or a later hadith that changed the ruling. Now, majority of the scholars said this is not mansukha, this is actually muhkama, so that it was not abrogated and it's not abrogating anything, but this ayah is actually a final one. So how do we explain the ayah in Surah al-Baqarah that actually talks about khulu' there? How do we understand these two? Number one is that when you would see contradiction, the Quran is not contradictory. There is something that is general and something that is giving you specification. Am and khas. So for example, when I would say, I want you to get out. Everybody stay. And she would say, well, you just said everybody stay. Well, that was an exception to you and I told you get out. All right? Yes, I generalized, but there was an exception. The same thing in the Quran. You can have an ayah that's generalizing and an ayah or a wording that's giving me a particularization. And you could also have an ambiguous ayah that's not giving me any clarification and another ayah that's giving me tibyan, that's giving me a clarification to the ambiguity in one ayah. Got it? You could also have an ayah that's giving me a generalization and an ayah that's giving me some form of a separate case. So this ayah is not whatsoever abrogating another ayah, but is actually saying, well, in certain circumstances, we've got khulu' being permissible. In that situation, you can combine these two ayat and say, well, yes, the ayah says, فَلَا تَأْخُذُوا مِنْهُ شَيْئًا, don't take anything from it. That is, if we're talking about a divorce. But if we're talking about a khulu', that's an exception where you can accept the mahr to be given back to you. أَتَأْخُذُونَهُ بُهْتَانًا وَإِثْمًا مُبِينًا. Would you take the mahr even though you had given it to them? Buhtan, it's a blasphemy. It's injustice to actually take back mahr. But here's one question. When we're looking at mahr, was it in replacement of anything? was it? The ayah. Su'ad, do you think you can give him a bottle or something? Maybe you could take off his coat. It'll help him kind of cool off. All right. وَكَيْفَ تَأْخُذُونَهُ? So the ayah now is clarifying. Well, why is mahr mandatory? وَكَيْفَ تَأْخُذُونَهُ وَقَدْ أَفْضَى بَعْضُكُمْ إِلَى بَعْضٍ وَأَخَذْنَ مِنْكُمْ مِيثَاقًا غَلِيظًا. Why and how can you take it? وَقَدْ أَفْضَى, when each of you had exposed one another to the other, exposed each other, that is, and they had taken upon you مِيثَاقًا غَلِيظًا, a covenant that was very strong, a bond. But still, what is أفضى بعضكم إلى بعض? If that is the reason for mahr and why she had the right of mahr, this is a very ambiguous term. What is أفضى? الإفضاء in لغة عربية is when you remove the barriers from one another and you're exposed to one another. So, scholars had differences of opinions on whether this is a metaphor to actually mean intimacy, or whether we would leave the term as generalized as is, in where it would include what is called al-khalwa as-sahiha. What is al-khalwa as-sahiha? Al-khalwa as-sahiha, literally, it means that they were alone in a valid private session. Now, what is a valid private session? What type of a private valid session? So what actually happened in that private session? Was there intimacy involved? No. So what did they do? They just exposed one another. Did they get any intimacy? No, there was nothing, but they exposed one another. Different things. Foreplay, touching, who knows? They didn't do anything, but they were close to each other and they had, let's just say, some exposure to one another. Some exposure to one another. That is al-khalwa sahiha. Whether there was intimacy involved or whether there wasn't any intimacy involved, some scholars, they said, because there was a khalwa sahiha, she has the right for the mahr. Because he had uncovered something. Uncovered even in terms of hijab. All right? We'll continue in just a bit, inshallah.
الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
هو الذي من الأحبار والرهبان لا يأكلون أموال تقوى بها جباههم وجنوبهم وظهورهم هذا ما كنتم لأنفسكم فذوقوا ما كنتم تكذبون وعدة الشهور عند الله 12 شهرا في كتاب الله يوم خلق السماوات والأرض منها 4 حرم ذلك الدين القيم فلا تظلموا فيهن أنفسكم وقاتلوا المشركين كما يقاتلونكم كافة واعلموا أن الله مع المتقين الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. إنما المسيح زيادة يضل به الذين كفروا يحلونه عاما ويحرمونه عاما ليواطئوا عدة ما حرم الله فيحلوا ما حرم الله زين لهم سوء أعمالهم والله لا يهدي القوم الكافرين. يا أيها الذين آمنوا ما لكم إذا قيل لكم انفروا في سبيل الله اثاقلتم إلى الأرض أرضيتم بالحياة الدنيا من الآخرة فما متاع الحياة الدنيا في الآخرة إلا قليل إلا تنفروا يعذبكم عذابا أليما ويستبدل قوما غيركم ولا تضروه شيئا والله على كل شيء قدير. إلا تنصروه لقد نصره الله إذ أخرجه الذين كفروا ثاني اثنين إذ هما في الغار إذ يقول لصاحبه لا تحزن إن الله معنا فأنزل الله سكينته عليه وأيده بجنود لم تروها وجعل كلمة الذين كفروا السفلى وكلمة الله هي العليا والله عزيز حكيم. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Should we just continue this ayah? Let's continue just this ayah, inshallah. So, وَكَيْفَ تَأْخُذُونَهُ وَقَدْ أَفْضَى بَعْضُكُمْ إِلَى بَعْضٍ. Now, it's important to mention, when we're speaking about al-ifda, and of course, when does the woman have the right for the complete mahr? Number one is if an intimacy did happen, and we're not talking about an intimacy that happened outside of marriage. Remember, أَخَذْنَا مِنْكُمْ مِيثَاقًا غَلِيظًا. This is if a marriage contract did happen. In other words, there was a marriage contract, yet we didn't have the wedding happen. There was a marriage contract, all right? A marriage contract happened. Whether a wedding happened or not, she would have the right for the full mahr if ifda happened. Whether ifda meant as a metaphor to mean intimacy, or whether ifda meant a khalwa sahiha. Got it? There's khalwa sahiha. What is khalwa sahiha? We just explained it. Whether it's, or even uncovering, they were alone. Umar ibn Khattab explained it, that they were alone in an area where no one else is capable of seeing them. In other words, they had a private area, a private moment. They were in a closed room, alone. Then that's it. And of course, there's a marriage contract. Okay. Now, here's one thing. If even though before an actual wedding, is it permissible that a woman would go out with her fiance / the guy that she had a marriage contract with? A fiance in Islam is not considered a husband. All right? Unless there's an actual marriage contract, that is a different story. If they agree, what is the difference? marriage contract is the fine line between an engagement and between a marriage. An engagement is nothing but a word of promise that we're gonna get married. An engagement does not act as a marriage. It's just a word of promise. All right? She is totally ajnabiyya. She is totally not to be alone with him or even speak like their love talk or romantic talk together, etc. They're not married. Therefore, they cannot engage in any type of an emotional or any type of romantic talk or even expose her body to him in any way. They cannot go out alone, somehow go for coffee, walk in the park. All of that is not permissible. Go to, I don't know, to a restaurant together without a mahram. No. All right. Now, when can they go out alone? Only if a marriage contract were to happen. Yet, what is common now is that they would have a marriage contract and then they would say, well, we're married. We've got our wedding planned 3 months from now or 4 months from now. And they would say, well, we're technically married, so therefore we'll go out together. And then they somehow end up basically getting intimate together. Girls, please pay attention to this. The more reachable, the more finds you as an easy access. That is the man. We're not talking about married couple here. When the man finds you an easy access, he stops having that longing for you. Be careful. Do not accept to be intimate with him whatsoever before an actual wedding happens. The second you accept to be intimate with him before the wedding, all the appetite and all the longing would basically start fading away. Do not be intimate. In fact, and it's a very considerable opinion, the Maliki scholars, they actually considered that an actual marriage to be valid, that it's not enough to have the witnesses witness the marriage contract, but the actual marriage to be valid is really by the wedding itself. Those are the people that are the witnesses. Who? The people that are coming for the wedding. That's the actual witnessing, right? This is important to keep in mind because what we're seeing is that a lot of marriages, they would fall apart before even the wedding happening because he found her an easy access. Men love challenge. Don't be an easy access. But when you're married and after the wedding, it would be haram to reject his access. Oh, look at the difference. When you're married, after the wedding, it would be haram to prevent him from getting access. Unless it was during their period. That's a different story. Unless it was during the period, we're talking about an actual intercourse access. That's the only thing that's haram. But other than that, it would be haram to give him access during, or let me say before the marriage contract. And scholars had differences of opinions, and they actually said, this is getting me too distracted. What did it? sake. They keep coming and going, and it's like, I feel like I'm opening a store, not really. All right. So after a marriage contract, after a wedding, it's out. It's out. After a wedding happens, that's when they're officially married. Before a wedding happens, and if there's only a marriage contract, if any type of going out alone were to happen, and that they're actually considered as practicing al-ifda, then in that situation, she would have the right for the mahar. And that's very important to keep in mind. In other words, for the man, be careful, because that would actually be a responsibility on you. You're paying a full mahar when you didn't even get anything? Why would you do such a stupid thing? Right? Just to be alone with a woman? No, just wait. All right, so Fatima Jibari, go ahead, my dear.
So I have a question about something that I heard of. I think it's basically practiced in the GCC countries, and they call it the Ru'ya Shar'iyya, which, based on my understanding, it's even before the contract, the man has the right to see the woman without hijab. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, absolutely. So الرؤية الشرعية, to basically see the woman, all right?
Mhm.
Is it permissible to see the woman? What is the amount? To see her with hijab, and of course her face and hands, the only thing that's exposed. That's the first opinion. Second opinion is that he would see the amount that she would be exposed in front of her maharim. That's the Hanbali opinion.
Also,
That
it's
she would
Hanbali.
The Hanbali, absolutely. The Hanbali opinion is that she would appear the way that she would appear in front of her mahrams. All right?
Okay.
That why? Why did they actually have differences of opinions? Because Al-Mughira ibn Shu'bah came to the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ basically told him, when Mughira told him that he had gotten engaged, and he said, "Anadharta ilayha?" Did you look at her? And he said, no. The Prophet ﷺ told him, فانظر إليها فإنه أحرى أن يؤدم بينكما. Look at her, because that's what will bring in emotional relationship between you. Now, the ambiguity, فانظر إليها, the ambiguity in the wording is what actually caused the scholars to have differences of opinions on how much to see. How much to see? See her with her face and hands exposed? Or is it to see more? Her hair, probably wearing not too immodest clothes, but at least a certain level of showing her hair, showing her arms, somewhat of probably long dresses, all right? Somewhat tight, probably on the waist, all right? Is that permissible? That's a considerable opinion. But pay attention, ladies, from saying, I've got an opinion, like the Hanbali actually said that that's permissible to see in a situation when he's actually coming to ask for the hand in marriage. Why? Do we have to be careful when the Hanbali madhab is clear? When we would find in a situation where there is fasad al-dhimam. What is fasad al-dhimam? Fasad al-dhimam, whenever the piety decreases in the ummah, we have to do what is called sadd al-dhara'i. What is sadd al-dhara'i? Sadd al-dhara'i is a legal maxim in Islam, and closing the doors and the means to evil. When we see that people's piety had reduced, we have to increase in the different regulations and the different precautions to make sure that our girls and our daughters are not exposed to every single person that knocks at the door claiming that they're right people to ask for my daughter's hand in marriage. No. Before, you would start exposing yourselves. Make sure you expose him first. And I don't mean by exposing him first, physically. No. Check out on his deen. All right? I'm actually talking about check out his deen. Ask about his deen. Is he a person of religious commitment? Number two, is he a person that physically, does he have some kind of does he have some kind of issues physically, whether it's an illness, mental illnesses? Number four, probably an issue with chastity, STD, all these things before you start exposing yourself to every single guy that's coming in. How much money is he making? How's his financial management? Is he the right person for you? Before you make yourself exposed to people, make sure that this person is what's actually looking like a person that you and your family would approve of. Because if you're going to expose yourself to each and every single person, then are you really valuing yourself? You're not valuing yourself. Make sure you recognize your value before others start going beyond your boundaries and you become exposed. And a woman's haya, a woman's bashfulness, her haya is actually the most beautiful thing. Many women think that by exposing themselves that they actually become wanted by men. It's actually the other way around. When you're actually reserved, when we, okay, don't worry, if they close it up on us, we'll get the whole dars throughout the night, we'll finish Surah Nisa. Right? What was I saying? Yeah. So when we look at the part with haya,
the covering part.
the covering part. When you put a high price on something, it gives it value. When you cover it, it gives it value. That's why diamond stores are all considered the highest security, even though it's really something that the earth makes. You don't see that kind of high security for potatoes. It's the earth that makes potatoes and the earth that makes the diamonds and the gold. But this one has high security because of its scarcity and because it's rare. You make yourself rare, you make yourself of value. But the more exposed you become, the less worthy you are. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you, well, because she's precious, even if you simply had anything of her exposed to you, I'm going to charge you for it. Exactly. I'm going to charge you for it, and you're going to consider that even if she was just exposed, you're going to pay the mahar. You're going to pay the mahar. Even if she was exposed, even if you didn't actually get more than that, yes, even if you didn't get more than that. Go ahead, my dear.
What if she does it on purpose? I mean, it's not his fault.
So, fair enough. What if she does it on purpose, despite so? So it's okay. Let the man say, I want your brother with us. Oh, let the man, please, Ammi, I want you to stay with us. Keep the door open. Because if you don't, you're going to pay the price, bro. You're going to pay the price. So don't get manipulated and be put in a loophole that you'd be paying the price for. No, keep the door open, please. It's really strange. Right now, we're seeing men fearful of their ird more than the women. Wallahi al-azim. Qasam billah al-azim, we're seeing men fearful for their ird more than the women. The men are like, don't even get near. La ilaha illallah. وَأَخَذْنَا مِنْكُمْ مِيثَاقًا غَلِيظًا. Inshallah, we'll continue next week. Speaking about وَأَخَذْنَا مِنْكُمْ مِيثَاقًا غَلِيظًا, and of course, this ayah, inshallah, وَلَا تَنْكِحُوا مَا نَكَحَ آبَاؤُكُمْ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ إلا ما قد سلف. This is actually going within that. This is extremely important. So all of this is considered the foundation of family fiqh. Foundation of family fiqh. Any questions before we end? I know it's a lot. I know it's so.
I do have a
Go ahead, my dear.
So I've had multiple answers, different answers to this question. What is the reason behind as to why a woman should ask for permission before she leaves the house? But asking permission for her husband. Like why?
Ask for a permission from her husband before she leaves the house.
Yeah. What is
Fair
the
enough.
reason?
Fair enough. What's the reason and what's the logic behind that? A woman would leave the house, and whenever she would leave the house, she has to seek permission. Every single governance, my dear. If you leave the country or you come in, you have to have a passport. You come in the country, you need a visa, an official permission, consent from the government for you to enter this territory. When you leave, they'll tell you more than $9,999 you cannot get out of the US. 1 penny. They'll tell you, thank you very much, give it to us. Even your money, you don't have the right to control. This is a government. This is the government. They'll basically tell you this is our territory and you abide by the law. But I'm an American citizen. Thank you very much. But guess what? You're still going to abide by the law that we set as an American government. All right? Same thing. Family is a territory as well, in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, well, man, I want you to be in responsibility over the household's security, the household's deen, the household's mental health, and the chastity, and the money. So he said, well, can I at least have some authority, some power to dictate? If you're giving me all that responsibility, give me at least the red flags, the tools for me to make sure that I'm managing what you're asking me to be responsible for. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, sure, I'll tell the wife and the children, you cannot leave the household without the leader's permission. In return, he's going to be responsible maintaining the household financially, security, and mentally. You're going to be responsible for that. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would tell the woman, you have to obey. Because if anything were to go wrong, we're going to hold him accountable. Fair enough. We're going to hold him accountable. And the whole thing is al-ghunmu bil-ghurb. If you want something in return, there's a price to pay, my dear. There's no way. You want services. Fair enough. We'll give you the services, but there's something that you have to pay in return. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you that the household is a territory. The husband is the security, the National Guard. The National Guard is basically responsible to make sure that everyone within his territory is safe and protected. The least will say, lady, we recognize that there's a lot out there that is trying to harm you. And we would want him to be the National Guard within this home. So at least let him decide when it's safe to do so. But my husband, he's abusing his authority. We'll raise it to the Qadi, and the Qadi will say, she's claiming that you're abusing your authority. Well, let's look into the case. If he's abusing the authority, he's not letting me go and visit my family, and he's always preventing me from visiting my dad, my father, my sister needs me, etc. Let's look into the case and see looks like you were abusing your authority, mister. We're going to reduce it by the power of the qadi. If you're abusing, if there's ta'assuf fi isti'mal al-haq, if there is an abuse in using the authority, the qadi will then minimize and regulate how his authority is done. But in general, if we're talking about a default ruling, the default ruling is that the husband has the responsibility to maintain security, to maintain peace, maintain stability in the household. The least we can give him is basically obedience from the residents, from the citizens. The wife is part of the citizens within this territory, right? Fair enough. Same thing. If you were to talk about a job, you don't just leave the job. You would have to tell your boss, can I go at this time? Right? Because if you go, he has to find another employee to cover up during that time that you leave. Or at least make sure that, okay, once you're gone, at least I know what needs to be done and that I'm not responsible, whatever it is. Well, if we cannot leave a company or leave the country, why did we think that a marriage institution was just a place of just going and leaving with no permission? Feminist movement had done so much to dismantle our homes and demonize the husbands as nothing but the word that they love using is patriarchy, misogyny. All these words would come up. They got the women outside of their homes and they ended up really the women paying the price, obeying the boss and becoming public property because they convinced the women that beware from being a property to your husband. So she became public property. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you, no, take the permission of your husband because he's got the responsibility to give you security. And when you take the responsibility, he takes the responsibility, you will see. Why would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tell us all that? Because it's part of your nature and part of his nature. It's part of your woman nature that you would want a man to be a man for you. And it's part of his nature that he likes feeling respected and appreciated as a man. Once you become the woman, you will see him acting as the man. And once he acts as the man, you will, by yourself, with no one telling you, you will become loving to let your female fitra, your female instinct come in. You will enjoy living like a woman, even under the husband's authority and the husband's qawama, even under his qawama, because it's part of your own fitra. You would love it. You would enjoy it because you know you're being protected. What is at stake is that the feminist ideology is making the women go against marriage by demonizing marriage as if it is nothing but a cage that cages women into a form of slavery. And that's extremely sad because they got them out of the marriage and put them as really nothing but servants to the people on the street. She had become a servant in her job and lost all of those things that she had at home. There's nothing like having the security, the care, respect from a husband. Demonizing the husbands and encouraging, and let me say, exaggerating about the fantasies of getting a job is really how the feminist movement worked. No, there's nothing more precious than being a wife to a good husband and a mother at home and be protected. And all this type of rhetoric that the misogynist, that the feminists, are always spewing in the minds of women, that misogyny and patriarchy and all of that, and labeling it as such, has really indoctrinated a lot of even Muslim women to misunderstanding and not even realizing the manipulation that they had actually lived in. And remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warned us and told us that وَإِنَّ الشَّيَاطِينَ لَيُوحُونَ, shayateen would inspire إِلَىٰ أَوْلِيَائِهِمْ. They would inspire their followers with what? زُخْرُفَ الْقَوْلِ غُرُورًا. Making zukhruf. They would fantasize certain rhetorics to make it seem attractive, when in reality, all it contains is nothing but a manipulation, nothing but a form of lies that will take you out of your beautiful home. Definitely, Islam will stand against a man that would abuse his authority, but at the same time, will say, well, there is a default. The default is obey your husband. Obey your husband. Obedience to the husband is actually your fitrah. And his fitrah, he wants to be a man and you want to be a woman. That's the fitrah. That's the fitrah. It's nothing to be ashamed of. I don't mind whatsoever. My husband tells me, don't go. Hadir, I'm just going to stay. And it's an honor for me. Don't mind whatsoever. I respect my husband. Even if I have a PhD and I know where to go, I know the Islamic ruling, etc., but I will still respect that my husband had given me the permission or not, and I would abide by it. Because the Prophet ﷺ was telling me that this is a form of ibadah. This is a form of worship. This is what brings instability. But if we're going to object and make our homes nothing but battlefields, no, how come you did this? And then we're just going to keep on arguing. Then what's going to happen? We just really, by that, we had made our homes into battlefields. Why make your home into a battlefield? Why make your home into a battlefield? How does it become a battlefield when there's no compromise? No, how come he's not compromising? Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told you to do ta'ah. Unless he's asking you for something haram, that's when I'll tell you not to. Unless it's beyond your capacity. Other than that, I will tell you, ta'at az-zawj is obligatory. It's exactly like you were to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet ﷺ told the Sahabiyat, your husband is jannatuki wa narak. Your husband is your jannah. He's your nar. You want to know whether you're going to jannah or not? Your husband is your jannah and your nar. Go ahead, my dear.
Based on that, do you have to ask him permission every time you're leaving?
So it depends on if he's okay with you leaving, and hey, maybe you've got, an app where it just, you guys are okay, and he basically can track where you're going and he's okay with it. That's absolutely fine. Okay. And if he's okay, well, as long as she's buying groceries, I'm okay. Hey, where you at, etc. That's absolutely fine. But if he was more jealous and he was like, no, before you leave, I'd like to know where you're going. Well, that's how your husband is.
And for the khula, like she has to give up her meher, right? But then when they come back, they're like, no meher gonna happen.
No mahar gonna happen? Well, she can take that mahar back. Remember, she gave him mahar.
Yeah.
So he's like, okay, so she can take the mahar back, or they can decide on a new mahar. All right. All right. Okay, we did this one. Some say that they have the right to see the legs up to the knee. Yeah, well, that's the Hanbali. We mentioned that one. What is the ruling for a man seeking marriage? Firstly, approaching your wali from the Sharia. The wali from the Sharia, what does that mean? When it's been normalized that they come to your family after they want your hand in marriage and they basically dated. So in Islam, there's no such thing as dating. All of that is supposed to be with the wali involved. To start dating and then, she's dating and she got to know him on her own. And then she comes, Dad, I got to know Ahmed and we basically are right now, he wants to ask for my hand in marriage. It's like, what? And I'm the last to know? No, Ahmed was supposed to come to your wali. All right, not come to you. When you come inside the home, you don't jump out of the window. You come inside the home, you knock at the door, and you get permission from the wali within that home. That's the father. That's the wali. Same thing, just as we're saying about taking permission from the husband. That's the same thing. If you don't have a husband, you've got permission. Your wali is your dad. He's the one responsible for you. Your wali is your dad. He's the one responsible for you. So you don't go and meet guys and date guys. The guy is supposed to come and ask your wali, I'm interested in meeting your daughter, but he doesn't know much about you. Well, he can get to know you while dad is present, while brother is present, while the mahram is present. But the system of dating and the girls getting to know these guys on college campuses is definitely not permissible whatsoever. He's supposed to approach the wali. Go ahead, my dear.
Can you approach the sister, like, see if he can talk to her dad though?
Definitely, he can approach a sister and say, well, can I talk to your dad? Not have conversations for hours and then say, can I approach your dad? No. So if, let's say they're together let's say college campuses, and of course there were different conversations in class. I'm not talking about between them, but he recognized she was commenting on a lot of things, etc. But then he was interested in approaching the girl, and then he said, can I have your family's contact? I'd like to talk to your dad. That's okay. That was the end of the conversation. It's not like we're talking about politics and what's happening in Gaza, and we basically had so much compassion for Gaza, and we talked a lot about this. What is this? Why are you talking to a man that's not a mahram to you and not a husband, and you guys are having back and forth conversations and all of that? What's going on here?
That's not okay.
That's not okay.
So is it considered haram?
It's considered haram.
The talking stage is haram.
You can't talk to as if you guys are having conversations. This is supposed to be limited talk only for necessity.
Okay, we're talking about like someone we're looking to marry, right? Not a coworker.
No, we're talking about coworker. We're talking about all the people on the street.
So-
You're not going to be chatting with these guys. It's supposed to be limited. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَخْضَعْنَ بِالْقَوْلِ. This is خُضُوع بالقول. الخضوع بالقول. It's basically when you're starting to be lenient in your voice and you're starting to hold these long conversations and etc. That's خُضُوع بالقول. All right. What are you guys chatting with these guys with? On different conversations like Gaza. The last thing that Gaza needs is really these girls and guys chatting together and all of that. It's like, are you serious? What Gaza needs is commitment and devout sisters and devout brothers. Gaza is not in need for more conversations that are not based on the principle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What got us to Gaza is really how the Ummah is far away from the deen. But if we're really strong in our deen, not America and not Israel would dare to attack Gaza, my dear.
We're talking about this talking stage, right? So I feel like it's been really normalized for men to come talk to you and approach you and have like, once they feel they're comfortable with you.
Well, that's
then
why
to
we're
come
doing
approach your
that
parents.
awakening. We're doing that awareness in order to tell the sisters, sister, get to know your deen.
Can we have more workshops about this? Like, I feel
Oh,
like a lot of
absolutely.
people think that the talking stage is normal.
We're gonna get to it, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. So we'll end right here, inshallah. And barakallahu fikum. Go ahead, my dear.
Okay. You say the khul'a, it can be more than one time? Is that what you say?
The khulu' can definitely be unlimited times.
Unlimited.
Yep. But I want you to keep in mind, yes, it can be unlimited, but don't necessarily assume that once you do khulu', that, oh, that way, and this is a common thing that a lot of women think, that once I do khulu', then he's going to recognize my value and he's going to really feel what it means to live without me. And she actually is playing the game in the wrong way.
What I thought is one time, like,
So here's what happens. Oftentimes, happen when a woman, for example, husband is calling and she's rejecting a phone call, thinking that it's funny. Later on, guess what happens? Once you continue rejecting the man is going to have his honor before you. He's going to forget you too. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was teaching women. If the husband wants you, your husband wants you to have relations, don't reject. Many women think that by rejecting that she's going to become more needed, when in reality, you reject once, you might see that he's insisting more, and reject twice and 3 times and 4 times. At the end, you're going to become unwanted. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, get it through your head. That's not how you get the things to work.
and that's haram too, right?
Oh, of course. There are certain games, don't play them. There are certain games, don't play them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you how to do things right and not play a game that's snapping at you. Don't snap things at you because you're harming yourself. Right? Go ahead, my dear.
You know, in the divorces, the women, like she goes through the other period where she has to stay.
Raise your voice. I can barely hear you, my dear. والله المرة الجاية.
Yeah, the period, she has to stay at home, right?
In the iddah,
Period, she has to stay home.
yes.
Yeah.
During the waiting period, she has to stay at home and can only leave when there is a necessity.
And does that include if she's going to school? Work?
Well, if she's going to school, that is a necessity.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so does that, so if there's, if there's a khula happening, and if she asks for that, and does the man have to, like, how does that, like, can he go get married in that period, or?
Oh, yes. So can the man get married in that period? Of course, unless he's married to 4 already and she's basically the 4th, then we're going to say wait until her waiting period finishes. Right?
Okay, so if she doesn't want him at all, it's not just khula, that's enough. She has to get the qadi to do the first, right? For it to be officially over?
Either there would be a talaq lid-darar, which the qadi would do a fasakh, or the man would actually do a divorce, or there would be khula. There's no other way.
But for khula, there can be all like the back and forth. 'Cause
Yeah,
there's no limit to
they can negotiate on how they want to finalize.
How about the fasakh? Is it
The fasakh, no, the fasakh, the qadi gives a final statement and says fasakh right there.
And they're not gonna come back ever again.
Not unless the qadi does another appeal, but the fasakh only the qadi can reappeal or appeal it. Only the qadi, not the man.
Okay, hold on. Sarah,
Ya alaikum salam. So go ahead, my dear.
And then my question is, who's the qadi in this modern day?
The qadi is the scholar that is specialized in fiqh, that is, I guess, assigned within the community to be in a place of qadi. All right, maybe in an Islamic center, the community regards him as a person to be in a qadi. He's specialized in that field, etc. Then that would be a qadi in here. Okay. All right. So we'll come back, inshallah. Fatima Jibari, go ahead, my dear.
I have a question about both talaq and khula. So if, let's say, talaq happens, should the wife text, for example, her brother and tell him, I'm divorced today, and then maybe if they get back together in 2 weeks, she would be like, we're back together? Or should we?
So
Should she
in order to get back, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically instructing that there would be ishad, that there would be a witness. So the husband would say, Assalamu alaikum, brother, etc. I'm basically bringing back your sister or your daughter, whatever, back into the marriage. So that would be an ishad. Right? So that situation, that would be basically, hey, now you're letting other people know, and you're not here abusing the woman, but he's also being responsible and regarded responsible. Hold on, is it haram for women to say no to her husband when she's feeling sick or tired, but the husband still insists? If she's feeling sick, okay, if she's ill, then in that situation, la darar wa la dirar. There's harm in Islam is a considerable thing, and if she's feeling sick, then if intimacy delays the illness, delays the healing, or if intimacy prolongs the illness, then in that situation she can reject intimacy. She does have the right to do that. But in terms of tired, to be honest, I don't know what it means to be tired and actually refusing. I don't really know. And I'm married. I don't know what effort you're going to be doing. Go ahead.
So I know you said that earlier. You said that when a woman and when a wife and her husband have a conflict, it's better not to tell anybody.
Ladies, hold on. Say it again.
You said that when a woman and her husband has a conflict, it's better that they don't tell anybody.
Right, but when we're talking about fine lines, my dear, fine lines, though, you know, all the different problem and the details of etc., that's what I would tell you and recommend, that you don't involve other people. But when we're speaking about fine lines, divorce, announcement, ishad, putting a witness, now these things are borders. All right, those are borders. No, I let your father know, we just had our first divorce. The husband call her father and say, I'm bringing back my wife, and it's before iddah. This is a border to maintain your hukuk, to maintain your right.
What in the case of, like, I know like in some cultures, usually even if it is the husband's fault, a lot of people tend to blame the
Oh,
woman.
absolutely. No, that's something that definitely, I agree with you, that the cultures do definitely put a lot of blame on the divorced women, that it's always her fault. And a lot of women have actually become victims due to that. And many of them are really abused. There's no doubt about that. But I would definitely recommend learning, although, you know, I did earlier speak about the marriage counseling system and all of that, but I do actually refer many to go through marriage counseling, because we really need to benefit from the different techniques of how to create communication between the couples. So there's nothing wrong with going through marriage counseling. And at the same time, I do recognize that a lot of women were definitely abused in the system of holding women responsible every single time for whenever a marriage doesn't work out. Absolutely. This is a common culture that definitely women are victims of. There's no doubt. There's no doubt. But I think that we have to work together collectively as a community, not only in talking about the protection for these women, at least their reputation, but I think it's also important to keep in mind that it's really sad that it's more women that hold women responsible than men. It's the women. It's the in-laws. Isn't she a woman? And I get this all the time. All the time, the mothers would be calling me asking for a wife for her son. She's divorced. No. I don't want the divorced woman, even though her son is divorced. The women are the ones to abuse women, my dear. The women are the ones to abuse the women. Before we hold the men accountable for all of this abuse, a lot of it, you will see that it's women that are responsible behind the abuse of women. It's really sad to admit. We have to educate ourselves before we start going into these latmiyat and starting to get into the Shia act of, just constantly complaining and crying. I think we have to recognize that we're actually abusing ourselves. Exactly how we started out with our class. It's the women that didn't recognize those qualified women. And the women are the ones that didn't recognize that this divorcee is to be respected, and it could be not her fault, but she will. But women are the ones to say, no, you, even though you're a divorce, but you can get something not consumed. That's the mother. That's a woman. We sometimes have to expose the realities rather than get the feminist rhetoric to indoctrinating us to seeing the men always being the demons. I'm not saying let's demonize women, but I'm saying let's expose those in responsibility in order to create better awareness. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا يَجْرِمَنَّكُمْ شَنَآنُ قَوْمٍ عَلَىٰ أَلَّا تَعْدِلُوا اعْدِلُوا هُوَ أَقْرَبُ لِلتَّقْوَىٰ. Not because there are certain tensions between you and any group, that you would somehow act in tension or agony towards any group, whether those are the men or whether those are certain people. At the end of the day, اعْدِلُوا, have the justice, have adl. That is near to piety. Be fair, right? All right, inshallah, we'll be fair and I'll let you guys go. Allah barik fikum. I know there's a lot to say, so inshallah, we'll continue next week. Inshallah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Are these recorded?
These are recorded, my dear, yes. Where can you find them? We do upload them on YouTube. And it's also on my Facebook. Yeah, you can follow me on Facebook. I almost have 12,000 followers. So yeah, Aysha Wazwaz, yeah, that fun.